what if the best way to prove a 1,000-year-old book is completely authentic isn't by tracking down the author at all?
Right, which sounds totally counterintuitive at first.
Yeah, but instead you just treat the text itself like, well, like a medieval blockchain.
I love that analogy. It's so accurate.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are exploring the invisible architecture of human knowledge. How do we authenticate the past, preserve its wisdom, and, philosophically understand the cultures that actually produce it?
It really is this invisible architecture. I mean, we rely on it every single day, usually without even realizing it, just to connect us to the thoughts and beliefs of our ancestors.
Exactly. And the stack of sources we have for you today, it gives us 3 completely different angles on how that architecture actually works.
Right.
First, we're looking at this revolutionary structural method for authenticating early Shia Islamic texts. It's called the baat al-Faristi.
Which is fascinating on its own.
Oh, totally. And then we'll apply that idea of structural truth to the Nahj al-Balagha, which is a foundational and deeply debated Islamic text attributed to Ali ibn Abi Talib.
A text that has been scrutinized for centuries, yeah.
Right. And finally, we are going to zoom way, way out to this 20th century Romanian philosopher, Lucian Blaga.
Oh, yeah, Blaga is great.
We're using his work to see how we can philosophically map the entire cultures that produce these texts in the first place.
It might seem like a kind of a wide net to cast,
Yeah.
moving from ancient Islamic textual verification all the way to modern Romanian philosophy.
It does sound like a jump.
But as we get into the weeds here, you'll see they're all trying to answer the exact same question, like how do we actually find truth across time and space?
So to kick us off, if we want to understand any ancient culture, we first have to prove its texts are actually real.
Naturally, you need a baseline of truth.
And our sources outline this paradigm-shifting approach to historical verification from the Islamic scholarly tradition. Usually, when scholars evaluate early Islamic reports, they rely heavily on this discipline called ilm al-riyal.
Right, which roughly translates to the knowledge of men.
The knowledge of men, yeah.
It's basically the traditional method of evaluating the trustworthiness of individual oral narrators in a chain of transmission.
So checking their references.
Exactly. You look at every single person who passed a story along and ask, well, was this person reliable? Did they have a good memory?
Were they even in the same city, right?
Exactly. Did they even live in the same city as the person they supposedly heard this from? It's very granular.
But our sources highlight a major historical divergence here that I found so interesting. Early Sunni transmission of hadith was largely oral for a long time.
Which naturally required that intense micro-level focus on the individual oral links.
Right, but early Shia transmission, it was distinctly written almost right from its inception. And that brings in this concept called the faharis, or firist.
Yeah, so a firist is essentially a catalog.
Okay.
Early scholars composed these catalogs to list the actual physical books they possessed in their libraries.
Like an ancient card catalog.
Pretty much. And it listed the transmission paths linking those specific books back to their original authors. Because the early Shia tradition was so heavily based on written texts, a student wouldn't just, sit and listen to a story.
Right, they had a more rigorous process.
They would literally go to an author, say, a companion of the imam, and physically copy out their book.
Wow.
And then, to safeguard against errors, the student would read their handwritten copy back to the author.
Oh, to check for typos.
Yeah, and upon passing that check, they would receive what's called an ijaza.
Which our sources compare to, like, a formal academic license to transmit that specific book to the next generation.
Exactly. It's this incredibly rigorous system of peer review and publication just happening in the early centuries of Islam.
And this leads us to a contemporary scholar introduced in the text, Ayatollah Sayyid Ahmad Madadi. He champions this approach, called the baat al-Faristi.
Right, the Faristi approach.
The crux of his theory is that because of this meticulous written tradition, certain early books became, quote, famous and textually stable.
And that textual stability changes the entire math of how we verify historical information.
Because the theory essentially argues that if a book is famous enough, and it's distributed widely enough, a diabolic copyist physically cannot alter it.
They just can't.
There are simply too many fixed alternative versions out there in the wild.
Right. If a rogue copyist tries to slip a fake report into their version of the book, it immediately stands out as a total forgery.
Because you just compare it against the dozens of legitimate copies circulating in the community.
Exactly.
And honestly, a distributed ledger where the network itself secures the integrity of the data against bad actors, I mean, that is exactly how a modern blockchain works.
It's such a great modern equivalent. The widespread distribution of the ledger, or the famous book, in this historical case, it creates an immutable record.
But wait, let me push back on this for a second. If we apply this rule, does it mean we just totally ignore a known liar or like a weak link in the middle of a transmission chain?
That's the obvious concern, right?
Yeah. Like, can we just bypass a shady narrator just because the book they're copying happens to be a bestseller?
Well, it doesn't mean abandoning critical evaluation at all. Rather, it shifts the focal point.
How so?
The method moves the lens from the micro-level purity of every single passive transmitter to the macro-level stability of the document itself.
Oh, okay.
Our sources note that early scholars, the Qudama, they didn't just blindly accept any report from anyone.
Right, they had standards.
They accepted reports that appeared in well-known books, or a famous as, which is like an original notebook.
Okay, that makes sense.
So if the document is structurally stable and famous, the lower intermediaries in the chain become merely passive transmitters. The book is doing the heavy lifting, not their individual memory.
Oh, wow. So as a result, many hadiths that modern scholars previously threw out as, quote, weak, based strictly on an individual oral link.
Yeah, they are actually being reclassified as completely authentic under this Ba'ath al-Faristi approach.
Because the network effect of the famous book protected the text itself. That is wild.
It really reframes everything.
Now, what happens when a text is missing those transmission links entirely? Because that exact problem sits at the heart of our next source.
It does.
And this examines one of the most famous and honestly historically debated texts in the Islamic world, the Nahj al-Balagha.
Right, the Nahj al-Balagha, which translates to the Path of Eloquence.
The Path of Eloquence, yeah.
It was compiled much later, so in the 11th century, by a prominent Shia scholar named Sharif al-Radi.
And it's huge, right?
Massive. It's a massive collection containing over 200 sermons, nearly 80 letters, and almost 500 sayings attributed to Ali ibn Abi Talib,
who was the fourth Rashidun Caliph and the first Shia Imam.
Exactly.
And this text has been the center of a fierce historical debate for centuries. The core of the controversy stems from the fact that when al-Radi compiled it, he largely left out the isnads.
Those chains of transmission we were literally just talking about.
Right. And because of that omission, Sunni theologians historically, like Ibn Khaldun and Ibn Taymiyyah, they strongly questioned its authenticity.
They were very skeptical.
They even suggested that al-Radi, or maybe his brother, might have just authored the whole thing themselves.
And it's crucial to understand for you listening that this skepticism wasn't just about, like, academic citation standards being poor.
No, not at all.
The text contains highly sensitive political material regarding the foundational years of the Islamic Empire.
Exceptionally sensitive. I mean, the prime example in our sources is the Shakshakiyya sermon, sometimes called the Roar of the Camel.
Right.
In this sermon, Ali sharply critiques his predecessors in the caliphate Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman.
Which is obviously a flashpoint.
Exactly. And our sources require us to look at this totally impartially to understand the historical divide. Sunni tradition generally rejects this sermon.
Because their historical framework often seeks to neutralize conflicts among Muhammad's early companions.
Right, to maintain community cohesion. So an explosive sermon where Ali openly criticizes the previous caliphs is naturally viewed with intense skepticism.
Conversely, the Shia tradition views it as entirely authentic.
Yeah, scholars like Abdul Hussein Amini have done this incredibly painstaking work. They provided several chains of transmission for the specific sermon that predate al-Radi's 11th century compilation.
So proving it existed before he allegedly, made it up.
Exactly. But modern academics have actually stepped into this debate as well. Scholars like Jaffrey and Vecchivalgieri have tracked much of the text back to earlier historical works.
Works that predate al-Radi.
Right, like the writings of al-Tabari and al-Yaqubi. So we know for a fact al-Radi was pulling from older, established sources.
He was a compiler, not an author.
Yeah, he was more like a historical DJ.
Oh, a historical DJ.
Yeah, he's pulling from existing vinyl records to compile a mixtape, which also explains why the Nahj al-Balagha is famously out of chronological order.
That makes perfect sense.
But here's the most surprising part of our sources today. Modern computational verification has officially entered the chat.
This part's so cool. Researchers are now using stylometric analysis and machine learning to examine the text.
Okay, for anyone listening who isn't a computer scientist or a linguist, What exactly is morphological segmentation?
Right, it sounds very dense.
And how does an algorithm use it to differentiate between the voice of an 11th century compiler and a 7th century caliph?
So morphology is just the study of how words are formed. Okay. Segmentation means breaking those words down into their absolute smallest grammatical parts. The roots, the prefixes, the suffixes.
Breaking it down to the studs.
Exactly. Stylometrics basically uses algorithms to track how an author unconsciously builds their sentences.
Unconsciously.
Yeah, because every single writer has a unique, almost imperceptible rhythm. The algorithm tracks how often you use certain function words, your sentence structures, and those tiny morphological choices. So just as the fire ace looks at the structural fame of a book to prove its authenticity,
Oh, I see where this is going.
right, modern algorithms look at the structural DNA of the words themselves.
So it's essentially looking for a linguistic fingerprint.
Precisely. And the computational analysis completely confirmed that the text
If you like this content, please like, comment and share. Tell us what topic you want to see next. And don't forget to subscribe.